cash, you the maid, so you back. I'm a savage, yeah. Classy, bougie, ratchet, yeah. Sassy, moody, nasty, yeah. Acting stupid, what's happening? Bitch, what's happening? Bitch, I'm a savage, yeah.
Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. You're going to be joining me today on another episode of Murder Meals, where I will be telling you interesting true crime stories while preparing a special meal for my family. So today I am going to be coming to you with a part 2 from my original video labeled The Pastry Killer. So if you have not already checked that video out, you definitely want to go ahead and look at that just so you can be caught up on today's case and what's going on in today's video. Now for today's meal, I'm going to be cooking breakfast because it is morning time and my kids are hungry. So for today's breakfast, I'm going to be cooking a stuffed strawberry French toast with breakfast potatoes, eggs. We all eat our eggs differently. My kids are probably gonna want sunny side up. I'm gonna do scrambled because I can't do the yolk. And I'm gonna make in sausage and breakfast potatoes. So now just to go ahead and jog your memory in case you may have been a little forgetful on what happened in part 1. Basically where we left off is we have John Hill and Joan Hill. They've been married. They had some marital issues. John was out here in these streets playing around, cheating, having a whole little affair. He was reconciling with his wife, came back home, but was still on the low, messing around with his mistress. All of a sudden, his wife got sick. He was supposed to be taking care of her and all this. For some reason, she wasn't getting any better. Eventually, Joan's parents came over to the home and they was like, no, you need to take our daughter to the hospital. He took her to the hospital. Within a few hours of arriving to the hospital, unfortunately, Miss Joan did die due to her sickness. Now, where we left off is basically where Mr. Ash Robinson stormed into the district attorney's office on the day of his daughter's funeral and accused John of killing his daughter, and he wanted something done. So that's what we're gonna go ahead and pick up today. Now while I'm doing that, I'm gonna go ahead and start on my breakfast potatoes. I'm gonna go ahead and cut up my potatoes, my vegetables, and my onions. I personally like, when I cook breakfast, I personally like to use yellow potatoes. I don't know, but that's what we're gonna be using today. So let's go ahead and get right into this. So again, on the morning of Joan's funeral, Ash stormed into the district attorney. He said that, John was responsible for his daughter's death. He wanted this investigated and charge be brought against John immediately. So Ash simply just explained all the reasons as to why he felt as if his son-in-law was the cause for his daughter's death. So the detective, and his name was I.D. McMaster, which is a very interesting name. He sat there, he listened, and then at the end of hearing everything that Ash had to say, he did go ahead and call down to his Harris County medical examiner and informed him to go down to the funeral home and take another look, an autopsy of Joan's body. And if he needed to, he was instructed to stall, delay, or whatever to the funeral in order to get this done, which, I mean, I don't know. Now, luckily, the medical examiner, he was able to get everything done without having to stop the funeral or postpone anything, because that just, to me, it's like, poor Joan has already been through enough. Let her just rest in peace, baby. But he was able to get everything done without having to stop the show, I guess you would say. Now, as Ash waited for the medical examiner to finish his report, Ash was just having multiple meetings with, just everyone involved when it came to like the house guests, the workers, and just different doctors, just to get their accounts of what happened, the possibilities or what could have happened, and just everything. Now, the autopsy report finally did come back, and on the report, it stated it stated that, and I quote, "It is my opinion based upon reasonable probability that the cause of death is due to acute focal," I don't know if that's a typo, "hepatitis, probable viral in origin." So after this report came back, the detective, he determined that there was no case here, and unfortunately, you know, he had to move on. There was nothing that he could do about it. So obviously with Ash, that wasn't going to sit well. Ash was not having that, so he just kept pushing. So Ash actually hired a lawyer who was actually an ex-district attorney in order to push the case forward. So they did actually petition and, you know, ask John if they could exhume Joan's body. Now, I don't know what they thought was going to happen, but John obviously, he said no. Because, you know, at the end of the day, he don't fool with you, Ash. And if he has something to hide, why would he give you the right to basically pull any of that information up to get him in trouble? So John said no to the exhumation request. He said no. Now keep in mind, Joan had been autopsied at the funeral home when they did that mess with the embalming, and then the first autopsy happened. Then the second autopsy happened the day of her actual funeral. But Ash, he wanted the third autopsy to be done. Poor Joan, she just couldn't get any rest in her final days. Honestly, even in her marriage, she was just tired. That girl was tired. She just couldn't get no rest. They just couldn't let her be. So, in Ash's words himself, he wanted the best pathologist in the United States to conduct the third autopsy, just so he could make sure that everything was done kosher and, you know, basically to get the results that he wanted, or just, I guess, really to find what happened to his daughter. So he did hire Milton Helfern, who was currently the chief medical examiner for New York. So he had this big time lawyer, a great pathologist. So with all of this information, with all of this on his side, he was actually able to get the grand jury to order a third autopsy of Joan and for her to be exhumed. Now, as soon as they brought poor Joan up and opened up her casket, it was very evident and clear that this was not the first time. She had already been disturbed, you know, as she rested in her final resting spot. So when they opened up the casket, there was actually dried mud that was inside the casket, that was on Joan's face, her hair. So you could just tell that obviously it had been open, dirt and mud fell in, and obviously was closed back and she was put back in. So when questioned, the workers there at the funeral home, they informed the detective and the pathologist, they informed them that John himself had actually had Joan exhumed a few days after her actual burial. It was actually 3 days after she was buried. So basically, John, he originally, when they went to bury Joan, he didn't want Joan buried with any jewelry at all, not even her wedding ring. So I guess there was some tiff about that, and she was buried with it. But old John, he said, that's fine, I'll come back later and get it. So Joan was actually missing all of her jewelry whenever they went and looked at her. So that's the reason why John had her dug up, so he can get the jewelry off of her. Just treacherous, terrible. But at this point, I'm not just too shocked about anything old Johnny boy does. So the examination actually did begin, and just off top, the pathologist, he was just shocked. It had actually come to his knowledge that the contents of Joan's stomach had never been examined because it was all still there. So she had the contents of her stomach, as far as the foods that she ate within the last few hours, still in her stomach. But what was even more shocking is that Joan was actually missing organs. Her brain and her heart was missing. It was just gone. And when I was reading this, I was thinking, now, I know they wasn't out here trying to sell her organs, her body parts, you know, but it's actually something more disturbing than that. So Dr. Morris, and I think he was one of the guys working on Joan, but Dr. Morris, he actually admitted that he had her brain in the trunk of his car. I don't know what he was doing with the brain, but it was in the trunk of his car that whole time. Now, unfortunately, I could not find any information as far as what happened with her heart. I don't know. Now, he did go ahead and examine the body. He actually examined the body for over 7.5 hours. Now, he thought that he did see signs of meningitis present, but he wasn't ready to make that determination and say that that was the cause of death. So what he went ahead and did is he took the blood and tissue samples back with him to New York, so he can go ahead and examine them further and just kind of, you know, run some tests on them. He stated that, you know, once he was done with his examination, he'll go ahead and he'll send the reports back to let them know basically what he found, found the cause of death to be. Now, it had always been concluded that Joan had died from some type of massive infection, but you have to understand that throughout this whole ordeal, she again had 3 autopsies done, that they actually came up with a slew of reasons and conclusions that they felt that Joan had actually died of. So they thought that they already knew that she had died from some type of mass infection, but due to the fact that the embalming had taken place before they could do the original autopsy, the exact reason and cause of her death, it wasn't able to be determined, unfortunately. Now, they diagnosed her with hepatitis, but that was actually ruled out due to she actually had no signs of hepatitis. They thought maybe it was meningitis. Now, after the many autopsies that she had done, Dr., and I don't know why I have to say his name again. Let me try to sound it out. What they say, sound out your words. Chimsky. We're just gonna say the doctor, the pathologist. The doctor issued a new report just stating, and I'm gonna read his quote verbatim. It is in my opinion that Joan Robinson Hill came to her death as a result of a fulminating infectious process, the specific nature of which is no longer determinable. He went on and actually recommended that the matter be investigated by the grand jury. So he was basically changing his whole tone, because one minute he was thinking, okay, there was no case here or there was nothing going on. Now he's saying, now that I'm looking at it further, yeah, y'all boys need to go ahead and look into this. Now, mind you, as all of this mess with the actual autopsy is going on, there was still drama going on behind the scenes. John had actually filed his wife's last will and testament just days shortly after his wife's death, which, okay, I guess that's not too suspicious. Well, but little did he know, Ash actually had another one. John went to file that one and he said, nah, homeboy, wait a minute. Here go a new one that my daughter had actually filed while you all were separated. So both last will and testaments had been presented. I don't know who you present those to the courts. Well, they have been presented whenever they try to cash in on this. They had been presented to whoever, the attorneys, to the peoples. Now, in the will that Ash had actually presented, it actually states that Ash would be the executor of Joan's estate, and leaving everything to Ash, and asking that Joan's parents were to get custody of their son. Now, John, he said, "Nah, this is not legit." He actually believed that this will was a forgery, so he actually hired a handwriting expert, and the handwriting expert actually agreed. He stated that the handwriting was all the way off from the original document that Joan had did, and he stated that the document was filled with grammatical errors in spellings and just a lot of typos, and just you could tell that it was someone trying to impersonate someone that practiced law. So they were basically saying that they knew that Ash had put this whole thing together just in order to stop John from cashing in on his wife. So they requested that this will that Ash had presented have that thrown out. However, the district attorney said, "You know what? We're not even going to look at this and worry about this until we get the situation as the problem solved as far as figuring out what actually happened to Joan herself before we say who's going to be getting any type of money or cashing in or just any of that." So they put that on hold, which makes sense because it's like, John, we don't even know if you offed your wife or not. So this should be the last of your worries. You just need to be focused on this. Oh, I really hate this cutting board. I want a new one. It just came to me. It was probate. Whenever you do a will, that goes to a probate attorney and you go to probate court. Yes, one of my friends is actually an attorney, and she does wills and handles estates and all that. So I should have known that off top, but it has slipped my poor little mind. Now, just 3 months after the death of his wife, John had actually gotten remarried to Miss Ann herself. Just trifling. He just trifling. Couldn't wait. Just, you go out and marry the mistress 3 months after your wife died. It's just, oh Lord. But, of course, that marriage did not last long, and why would it? It was just built on just horrible foundation. The marriage didn't last long, and a little less than a year after being married, they actually separated and got divorced. Now, I'm not even gonna play with this onion today. I'm gonna peel it, and I got my old little chopper. She's ready to go. But obviously, Ash, he was not giving up, and he was pressing hard for the grand jury for the case to go and be before the grand jury, so John could be indicted on charges of killing his daughter. Now, obviously, with the little rumor mill being the rumor mill going, John, he wanted to keep the public on his side, and he just wanted to kind of clear his name. So he had actually, that one just got you, girl. Yeah. Okay, sorry about that. So he wanted to keep the public on his side, and he also wanted to convince the grand jury that he didn't have anything to do with his wife's death and he was innocent. So he actually, so he had actually hired, and honestly, this part is a bit confusing. He said that he had hired an attorney, but it also stated the person that he hired was a private investigator. And it's actually the same private investigator that Ash had previously used to look things up about John. I don't know, maybe he was both. What they say, a jack of all trades. But his lawyer had advised him and suggested that, hey, maybe it'd be good that you take a lie detector test in order to prove your innocence. So that's what John did at the advice of his lawyer. But then John, I guess he thought about it. He said, you know what? Instead of a lie detector test, how about I instead just answer some questions while you all put me under and give me truth serum? I'm not going to attempt to pronounce it. There's actual a real name for this, but it's truth serum. So they agreed to do the old truth serum, and they actually questioned John. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and make the filling for the stuffed French toast. I forgot what I was making for a second. Hopefully this cream cheese is soft enough and I don't have to put it in the microwave to soften it at all, because that's annoying. But anyways, so John was supposed to do his test in front of his lawyer, of course, and also the detective, McMaster. Now, John actually did pass his test. However, McMaster was under the impression that the drug had not worked, just simply because he felt like John was too composed and just too calm during the questioning. So he kind of had his suspicions that it just didn't work, and so he really kind of just took that with a grain of salt. Now, the first grand jury, it deliberated, it heard evidence, and it came back with actually no indictment of John. And obviously, Ash was none too pleased about this, and he actually told his lawyer that, hey, you need to go back and you need to get them to take him before the grand jury again. And his lawyer actually told him no. Well, obviously at that point we know that boy was out of there. And Ash fired him and hired a new lawyer. You wasn't about to tell him no to anything, especially nothing when it comes to his daughter's death, which I get. So in all, Jones' case would actually go before the grand jury 3 times. Now, I know the timeline may be a little bit confusing, but just mind you, all 3 of these instances of going before the grand jury, those are actually kind of intertwined between, her body getting exhumed, if that makes sense. Hopefully it does. Now on February 1970, the case would actually go before the grand jury a 3rd and final time. And this time, the grand jury would actually hear testimony from Anne herself. And it was actually just 1 day after her and John's divorce was final. Now, side note, John's attorney did tell him that it was not a good idea to divorce Anne, and he should wait until after his trial, due to the fact that, as we know, marital spouses can't be called to testify against their spouse or whatnot. But I guess John was done with Anne. He was tired of her. I don't know. But he didn't care. He proceeded with the divorce, and in result, Anne testified against him, which we will actually talk about some of that testimony a bit later in the story. Now, Anne did, however, confirm what the detective had already kind of assumed, she confirmed that John had taken something to counteract the truth serum, and that is why he was able to pass that. But Detective McMaster, he wasn't shocked by that, because again, he already kind of guessed that that's what happened, and just verified that information. So now I'm going ahead and try and do this. Now, John did actually testify himself at the grand jury. However, this actually did more harm than good for him. Just simply because he actually gave a very contradictory story of what happened in a series of events than everyone else that was actually involved. He was just describing his wife in a way that was unrecognizable to a lot of people, and he just seemed to be very nonchalant and just uncaring about the whole situation just as a whole. He was described as being very cool and aloof, and he just didn't care, and you can tell. This just made anybody who was really kind of thinking that he was innocent, it kind of made them question and look at John differently, just from his words and his actions alone. So by the end of the grand jury, most people had thought, yes, John did kill his wife, and he was actually finally indicted. However, he was not indicted on murder charges. Unfortunately, still, there was not enough evidence to conclude that he had killed his wife, although most people was looking at him like, yeah, boy, we know you did it. But there was not enough evidence. So they came up with another way. My mom used to always say, there's more than one way to skin a cat. He was actually charged with murder by omission. Again, this had never been done in the state of Texas until his case. It was stated that, and I'm again read a quote, it was stated that he willfully, intentionally, and culpably contributed to his wife's death because he had not given her significant medical help. I mean, the man was a whole doctor out here, and so the trial actually began February 15th of 1971, and Miss Maxwell, Jones' friend and neighbor, she would actually be the first to testify in this trial. However, the biggest and most impactful testimony would actually come from Anne herself. Now, it was actually said that the judge actually had some hang-ups and reservations already about Anne testifying, just due to the nature of her and John's relationship and how they were just recently divorced, but they were in fact divorced, so he did let her proceed with her testimony. Now, baby, when I say Anne was there to spill tea, she was there to spill the tea, hunty. So Anne actually claimed that on June 30th of 1969, John actually had tried to kill her. She said that John actually tried to kill her by running their car into the side of a bridge. Now, not only did he try to, kill her by, running their car into the side of the bridge, but she also claimed that he injected her with something, with a syringe. And I'm just like, this boy John just gives zero bleeps. He was just out here just trying to take all the girls out. Oof. Everybody be saying, oh, I want me a doctor, but it's like, them low-key probably be the ones that can kill you and then get away with it. Now, Anne actually stated that around the time that Joan had actually started to get sick, she was actually at John's apartment, and she said that she went into the restroom and she actually saw 3 Petri dishes, and it looked to have some type of red solution or some type of redness going on inside of the Petri dishes. And then whenever she asked John about it, I guess I should probably move this. But whenever she actually asked John about it, she said that he got so annoyed. And he told her that it was an experiment. He was doing an experiment. I know she probably thinking, now what the hell is this doing in your bathroom? But I guess it'll make sense in a few. So the next day, she said that she was actually in his refrigerator and she saw some pastries. She said that she tried to get her a pastry, but again, John instantly got onto her. He snapped and he was so just annoyed, and he told her that she could not eat those pastries. Those were not for her. And she was just taken aback just as to why he would have such a strong reaction to her just trying to get her a little snack. Now, mind you, previously her Joan's friends had stated that John had given all of them pastries, and he was very particular about which pastry each one of them had, and if Joan tried to switch out pastries, he would tell her no. He would say no. Now it's coming, full circle. Now, Anne actually claims that on the night of the car crash, when John tried to kill her, that he actually admitted and went into great detail about how he killed Joan. She said that he stated that the Petri dishes actually contain a slew and just a variety of different type of cultures grown from human waste. Again, leading back to it being in the restroom. And she also states that these were actually initially injected into the pastries that John had given Joan. However, Joan had actually only gotten just a little bit sick. So obviously it didn't do much. So then at that time, it was said that whenever Joan had gotten sick, she had asked John if he could give her something in order to help her feel better. So then at that point, what did John do? He then at that point put the cultures, and I guess he had a stronger dose or more concocted, I don't know. But either way, he put the samples from the Petri dish inside the syringe, and he injected Joan directly with that in order to get her more sick. But unbeknownst to Joan, she thought it was medicine to help her feel better. Now, they said that your girl Anne, she was up there giving them everything. They said that she was up there doing full-blown shows. And she was trying to stick it to John, which I guess she said, look, I low-key don't even need to open it. But I guess she said that, hey, I rode with you, or I was your rider, your mistress in X, Y, and Z, and then you just go ahead and you discard me, you divorce me. It was said that Anne was out for revenge, so she was just up there spilling all the tea. Now, unfortunately, Anne's plan to stick it to old Johnny boy, it actually backfired. It backfired on her because, again, if you remember, they already stated they do not have enough evidence to charge John with murder. He was on trial for murder by omission, basically stating that his care of Joan, and his neglect of Joan is what actually contributed and caused her death. So Anne's testimony and bringing up the fact of how John tried to kill her and how he admitted to killing Joan, all of that was actually unusable in this trial. However, it had already been said, the jury had already heard it, so John's attorney, they actually requested a mistrial. And the judge, after a few days of deliberating and thinking about it, he actually granted said mistrial. And the case was at that point dismissed. John, that boy was happy. I bet he thought he was out here just scot-free, footloose and fancy-free, as some will call it. Now, John had actually remarried for the third time to a Connie Losby in June of 1971. Now, word on the street is that he actually had an affair with her while being married to Anne, which, not surprised, they normally do repeat behavior. Now, the prosecution team actually, they wasn't gonna let John just get off this time. Ash didn't really have to do much, say much, because at this point, he really had the court on his side. Now, just weeks before John's retrial was actually set to begin, John and his wife Connie were actually coming home from a medical conference that was in Las Vegas. So whenever they came home from the medical conference, they both approached the front door, and Connie had rang the doorbell. Whenever she actually rang the doorbell, she was actually met by a masked man saying, "This is a robbery." Child, I've been scared. I would have been terrified. Now, at first, which I get this part, at first, she just thought it was her stepson just playing jokes. So my kids do it all the time, trying to play. And I was like, now look, you almost got these hands because you're trying to play games. Now we both up in here, petrified and scared, and somebody hurt. However, just an hour before they returned home, the masked man had actually came to the house and actually bound it and put tape over John's son, so Connie's stepson, and John's mother. So they were there, but they were bound, and I don't want to say gagged, but bound and couldn't speak. Now, Connie was able to fight against the masked man, and she was able to escape, and she took off running down the street, just screaming to her neighbors, just trying to find help and ringing, her neighbor's doorbells, just trying to, get someone's attention. Now, she actually did get the attention of a neighbor who actually, called the police. Now, in the process of her running and trying to find help, Connie actually did hear gunshots. So, by the time the actual police and the ambulance did make it to the home, they actually did find John's body laying face down in a pool of his blood in the foyer. So at that point, John had actually been fatally shot, and there was nothing that they could do to bring him back. John was dead. Now, I ain't saying the girls was rejoicing, because again, a boy has just lost both of his parents. That is definitely sad. But literally, the jury was still out on John. So now, when John's body had actually been turned over, they had actually found that his mouth, his eyes, and his nose had actually been taped, and he was actually very badly beaten. He actually had 3 gunshot wounds, 1 to the shoulder, 1 to the chest, and 1 to the right arm. Now, immediately the gossip mill took off, and everyone just naturally assumed that Ash was in on this, that Ash had something to do with John's murder, and for obvious reason, I guess we can all say. Now, even Connie and her stepson, Ash's grandson, they even thought that Ash was responsible for John's death, and they actually went ahead and filed a $7.6 million wrongful death suit against Ash. Now, let me start by saying I know this part is not funny. Trust me, I know this. In my spirit, I really do. However, it's still funny, so I did have to let you all know as well. So, the way that they were able to find out about the killers, that part, child. So, apparently, John's John's briefcase had went missing during the murder robbery, and some boys had actually found it in a field. Now, whenever detectives came and they found it, they actually found a gun as well. The gun actually had handmade bullets, and they were able to trace that down and trace it back to a doctor. Now, whenever they questioned said doctor in regards to the gun, he actually said that he had been with 2 women of the night, and whenever he was asleep, they had stolen from him. And they actually had stolen his car and money. So, he actually took the gun in order to go hunt them down, I guess to get his stuff back. Now, I don't know if he planned on using it. But as he was about to leave, these strawberries keep falling. Probably because the bread is small, but it's fine. We just know to get our bread somewhere else. But as he was leaving, another lady of the night actually called him and asked did he want company. He said yes. Now, whenever this one came, he again fell asleep. And whenever he fell asleep, she actually stole the gun. What's funny to me is that, first of all, sir, maybe you need to lay off the women of the night, or if you feel that you can't resist, because whatever, it's your business. Stop going to sleep around them, because you keep getting stolen from while you sleep 2 times. And then when you're trying to go hunting down the first 2 girls who stole from you, you let another girl come and then again steal from you the same way. Ooh, child. That's too much for me, honey. That's too much for me. Now, the doctor was able to give the detectives her street name, and they were actually able to track her down, oddly enough. So she actually went by the name Dusty, but her real name was Marcia McKintrick, and she was actually involved with a man named Bobby Wayne Verdict, and he was actually a known repeat criminal in the area. And actually, after his last stint in jail, it was known that he was a PIMP. So they were actually able to track them down and bring them in for questioning. Now, when brought in for questioning, Verdict actually denied all claims that he was involved in any of this, obviously, who most criminals do. However, he went ahead and quickly confessed after Miss Hill, John's mother, was able to identify him. I guess he said the jig was up. He actually rolled on his girlfriend and gave her name up, but we already knew that she was involved. But he also indicated that there had been another woman involved named Lila Palouse, and she was a former SEX worker herself, and he actually let it be known that he had done this killing for monetary profit. He said that he was paid $5,000 in order to kill John. So this was a contract killing. Now, McKintrick, he was at this point just up in there just singing. And he said and I'm again read his quote. Police told me the contract was on a doctor who killed his wife, and that it was the wife's father who wanted him dead, stating that the grandfather wanted custody of the child but could only do so if the father was dead. So at that point, it was Ash who actually had hired Layla to find someone in order to kill John. He stated that once he agreed to go through with the killing, they instantly started planning, and he had actually contacted John at his office in order to schedule an appointment. However, they told him that he was actually in Las Vegas for a conference. So then at that point, they had actually went out to Las Vegas in order to find John, but they couldn't find him. So they had returned home to wait for him at the house in order to carry this out. At this point, Van Diver was actually indicted on murder charges, and Marcia was actually indicted on accessory to murder. She was indicted on accessory to murder for being the getaway driver. And that was actually set for trial for April 1974, but the day that the trial was supposed to begin, he never showed up. Well, it turns out that boy had fled. He actually moved down to Longview, Texas, and he adopted an alias. He tried to keep a low-key profile, but obviously he couldn't live his life right. So he was down there causing problems just like he was up here. Now, the sheriff down in Longview, he actually got suspicious of the newcomer, and just of his behavior, he started to look into him. That's when he actually did discover who his true identity was. Then at that point, he had actually went down to a diner where he was having, I guess, breakfast or something, and he actually confronted him, and that actually led to a shootout where unfortunately Van Diver was actually fatally shot, so he was never able to stand trial for his part in the murder of John Hill. Marcia, she wasn't with it. She wasn't trying to have any parts of what her late man, spouse, whatever you want to call him, had. So she folded. She corroborated his story, and she actually went to trial and was convicted. She was actually sentenced to 10 years for her participation in the murder as the getaway driver. So at that point, they wanted her to actually testify against the third individual, Miss Layla. Forgot about her, right? Now, Miss Layla, she wasn't going down easy. She was saying that she didn't have anything to do with this. She denied any type of involvement in this case whatsoever, but she was still indicted for her part in it as an accomplice to murder, so whatever. Now, at the trial, Miss Marcia, she actually testified that Ash had actually paid her, that Ash had actually paid Lila $25,000 in order for her to find someone in order to take that boy John up out of there. Ash obviously is saying that he had no involvement in any of this. He doesn't know what they're talking about, and this isn't happening. And Lila is saying she had nothing to do with it as well. So they actually both had took polygraph tests. Ash and Marcia had actually took polygraph tests, so they took lie detector tests, and they both passed. Ash passed on the basis of him saying that he had no involvement of the killing of his son-in-law, and Marcia saying that she Marcia's saying that Ash was the reason for John being dead, and he was the mastermind behind the whole plan, and he paid and set everything up. So they both actually end up passing. So really, nothing can really be used or done with that information. Now again, during his polygraph test, Ash said, no, I didn't have anything to do with it. But that boy stuck with the fact that John had everything to do with his daughter being gone. So dead or alive, Ash wasn't letting that go. And he wanted to make sure that he went on record stating that John did have everything to do with his daughter dying. Now, Layla's own daughter actually did testify against her own mother. And she just painted her mother just as a horrible person, a horrible mother. And I'm not even gonna get into everything that she said about it or about her mom. Just know, child. And it was also found that Ash had 3 private lines. I'm assuming this was back during the party line era. If you don't know what a party line is, basically, I guess back then, the people in the neighborhood would all have one line, and basically when you picked up the line, you could hear other people's conversations. That was kind of sort of like a party line. It was supposed to be like way cheaper than having a private line, but Ash obviously could afford it, and he had 3 private lines. And it was said that they actually have found a piece of paper in Layla's possession, I guess in her home, where it had like the imprinting marks of one of Ash's 3 telephone numbers, just adding to the point that you two had been communicating at some point. But so that just wasn't a good look for her. Now, Layla Palouse was actually convicted, obviously, and she was given a 35-year prison sentence. Ash was actually found not guilty, and he was never held responsible for the murder of his son-in-law, John. And the wrongful death case was actually dismissed and thrown out. So, unfortunately, they never got that money, and if Ash was involved, he got off scot-free. Now, Connie did apply for custody of Robert, her stepson, and that was actually backed up by John's mother and his sister that I didn't know he had. Now, he actually lived with his stepmother for years, so I guess that was good. He did lose his mother, but at least he was able to get a mother figure out of the whole situation, and that was actually very good for him. In regards to the actual estate with the whole fiasco with the will, Ash had actually won. He won that in probate court, and that went to him. Now, in 1979, Ash and his wife actually moved down to Florida just to get away from the ongoing buzz and spotlight, having to do everything with his daughter's death, his son-in-law's death, and just everything in regards to the case. Now, Robert did actually finally reconcile with his grandparents, and he actually ended up moving to Florida with them after some time. Now, Anne and her 3 kids, they actually moved to seclusion. They actually moved outside of Austin, and wasn't much heard from her and her kids. Now, she did go on and later write a book in regards to just the events of the case and everything from her perspective. And the book was actually called Prescription Murder. Now, she did later die of an aneurysm in January of 1990 at the age of 59. Marcia, she was just quiet. She actually ended up serving 5 out of her 10-year sentence, and then she got paroled. Not much was heard from her. She went on to live her life and I just feel like that's the best. Now, when it comes to Layla, she actually appealed her case, and that's a whole nother odyssey. I didn't have time to get into that because that just took us on a whole nother journey. But unfortunately, her conviction stood and she had to serve her time. Now, oddly enough, she never came back and said that Ash actually hired her, that Ash had any type of involvement. So just a few things can be assumed from this. So either Ash really didn't put her up to this, or he had something over her, maybe he was blackmailing her, or maybe she was just so fearful of him because he was a very rich, powerful man. Maybe she thought that he could have done something to her. We don't know. But she never indicated him in anything up until the day that she died. She unfortunately did die due to breast cancer, and she died on May 16th, 1986. Now, to his dying day, Ash remained adamant that John had everything to do with his daughter's death, and he had nothing to do with John's death. He said that Miss Lila loved Joan, and she just did this in order to get justice because she just felt like it was just horrible the way her life was cut short, and he stuck to his story. Now, Ash did die in Florida in February of 1985 at the age of 87. His wife did follow him shortly after, 2 years later at the age of 86. Now, there had been some conspiracy theories related to this case that I just thought was kind of interesting. It was actually said that John never died. It was said that John had faked his death, and he actually had another body placed in the home to make it look like it was him, and that he had actually escaped down to Mexico. It was said that he did this due to he owed the IRS a lot of money. So he was in trouble with the IRS, and he had obviously all of his legal issues as well. Now, funny thing about it is that Anne and the detective on the case actually spoke about this in their books that they both had written. And it was said that the eye color of the body of the man that was in the home was not the same eye color as John's. And it said that he was beaten so badly in the face to where you could not actually recognize him. So there was really no way to prove that it was John. Now, there has been said sightings in Mexico of John. Now, how true this is, we don't know. Now, there have been a lot of publications as far as books, movies, shows, or whatever the case may be in regards to this case. Thompson Thomas actually wrote a book in 1976 called Blood and Money. And Anne actually sued him for $3 million due to her portrayal in this book. It was said that she was portrayed as a loose, heavy makeup wearing, just, you know, really herself, unfortunately. Now, this case was actually thrown out because the judge said, this is you. He portrayed you correctly, so the case was dismissed. She never got anything in regards to that. Now, there was a 1980 CBS television report done saying that the physical evidence had been re-examined from Joan's case, and it was speculated now that maybe Joan had died of toxic shock due to, you know, tampons. But the medical examiner did state that although Joan did have some symptoms related to toxic shock, it wasn't enough, and there was other symptoms that she should have had that she just didn't have. So it wasn't enough evidence there still for him to feel confident enough in order to change his ruling on how she died. So still to this day, unfortunately, there's really no clear explanation, no hardcore reason on how Joan was actually killed. But that does bring me to the end of today's case. What did you guys think? Now, I got a few questions for you, and you can definitely go ahead and leave your answers in the comments. First question, do you think John killed his wife? Do you think that John actually poisoned his wife? It was really up in there killing her. Do you think that John really tried to kill Anne? Do you think, because it's just like, would he really be so bold? And then my other question is, Anne, do y'all think that Anne was in on it? Do y'all think that she was, I wouldn't say a part of the plan as far as she did the poisoning, but do you think that it was possible that John told her the plan, or they plotted together and she was okay with the plan because she wanted to be moved from mistress to main chick? That was kind of on my mind, just wondering, could that be a possibility? And then I guess my last question is, do you think Ash had your boy John up out of here? Do you think that he was involved in that? I kind of have my theories on all of it. Definitely, I look forward to seeing what you all have to say. If you want to go ahead and leave a comment in the comment section, just tell me what you think, your opinions, any questions. I definitely hope you enjoyed this story. It just had a lot of drama, a lot of twists and turns. I hope you enjoyed the cooking, and I will definitely leave the recipe down below. And again, always remember to like and share and subscribe to my channel.
Yep.
And
I'm gonna do an ending too. And
he just ready to eat. Like and share and subscribe to my channel. And definitely come back next time for another episode of Murder Meals.
y'all have a great day.
Savage.